And hopefully that should kick in. It's thinking about it. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so as we do go through the session, I don't always like it to be the world according to Matt Weston. So I do like a little bit of interaction. So please, if you do have questions, feel free to unmute and just jump in. I don't mind you interrupting me, or feel free to post into chat, and we'll make sure that we get the get any questions picked up in there as well. So what am I going to be talking about then? So driving adoption and governance for Microsoft Teams. This is one of the biggest areas that pretty much every company is having to tackle right now, because we rolled out, a lot of organizations rolled out Teams so quickly during the first lockdown that actually it just went to everything being open, right? Users, crack on, you need this, go and do what you need to do. Or maybe it was a case of, right, users crack on, and the users go, actually, we don't know how to use this. So what can we do around this? So governance and adoption are two of the most important things to the success of a good platform. Being able to control it, being able to bring users along on the journey. And what we're going to be looking at this evening is how we can use Power Automate to really support that entire process. So first of all, quick question to all of you, and either please use the either post into chat or feel free to use the reactions. How many of you have actually got a Microsoft Teams governance plan? And last time I asked this in a session, I got some real laughs coming back. Okay, no, oh, we got one. We definitely got a laugh there. Okay, so most organizations don't actually have any type of governance around Microsoft Teams. So what does that actually mean for Teams as a platform? If there's no governance, what we generally see is that everybody does whatever they want to do. It's like the Wild West. So you end up with lots and lots of teams all created with no apparent reason. You have lots of teams created for the same thing. So it might be that actually I've gone and created a new team called Matt's project. Someone else did exactly the same because they didn't see mine that had been already created. So we've now got duplication. So from a tenancy point of view, that immediately means that actually I've got so many too many teams for what we actually need. From a usability point of view, I've now got issues because my users are getting confused. They don't know where they should be saving their documentation, where they should be having their conversations. And for me, this always starts ringing alarm bells around security, because who knows what security or what audiences are actually part of those teams. So if you don't have that governance around the actual team creation and the team management side, then effectively you are really leaving yourself open for a huge number of problems further down the line. And if you haven't been bitten by that yet, maybe you're still quite early in your team's adoption or your team's rollout, it will bite you at some point. So now's the time really to start giving it some thought. So what do we generally see? Oh, Jason deployed the request to Teams app from GitHub. Yep, so there are solutions out there, and I'm going to show you another one tonight. So what happens generally if something does go completely open with governance? Well, IT teams generally have a knee-jerk reaction, and they go from being completely open to, oh my God, I'm going to close absolutely everything off. And so generally what we then see is that users aren't able to do what they need to do. Now, I will hold my hand up and say that I have been an absolute stinker for this in the past. I previously worked for a company where we went from being quite open with our team's environment to suddenly being completely locked down, not allowed to even create a team or even a channel without the say-so of IT. So that meant that my hands were so tied that I couldn't work in a way that was flexible enough for me. I had to, so what did I do? I went and created my own tenancy and started managing all my projects, all my work in that tenancy. So generally we see both ends of the spectrum, but really what we want to try and do is find that part in the middle where we can empower the users, but we still maintain control over our actual team's tenancies. So there's a couple of things dropping into chat, which is really good. So we still have around 900 Microsoft groups though from before we put governance in. So yeah, absolutely. So there's always there's always some tidy up work to do, but at least you're starting to put damage limitation in place. So you're starting to control it, which is good. And in honesty, the setup of a team must be made into IT, and we discuss and agree the parameters of the team. Yeah, so a couple of good, interesting points there that have just been raised in chat, just really are highlighting the two ends of that spectrum. So I'm going to ask the question. So if you have everything being through IT, how much of a drain is that on IT as a resource to actually create your teams?
It's Neil from NRL. It's actually not too great because we're not a huge business. We've only got 120 people within the organisation, and we are geographically dispersed. So effectively, we have recruitment branches up and down the length and breadth of the UK. So branches are quite centralised teams, if you like. So the governance from that perspective isn't too bad. It becomes a greater challenge, I guess, when we have a requirement for the creation of a team that spans across the organisation. But we aren't a huge organisation, so we definitely don't have the challenges of a 1,000+ organisation, like I guess some guys would have on the call.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point. So yeah, absolutely. So it's not too much of a draw on resources now, but if you can even free yourself up 5 minutes to actually go and do other stuff, then that's what we'll get to by the end of this session. So when I talk about teams and teams governance, I have what I call my governance pyramid. And this is effectively how I layer up all of the different things that I actually place into that governance plan. So I start out with my tenancy settings. So I'm looking at how do I protect my tenancy as a whole? What are our objectives? What settings do I need to create? How am I going to allow my users to communicate? So I start very much in an administrator's court, because what we're trying to do is provide the assurance over the platform before we actually get our users fully up and running on there. And as we start to build up that assurance, I then need to, and I've protected the actual tenancy itself, I then need to start thinking about how I can protect the data. So then I can start looking at classifications and sensitivity, not just for the actual documents or the files themselves, but how I can also apply that to the teams themselves. So governing who can use the teams, what devices they can be used on, putting those protections in place. So far, I'm really in the administrator's area, and I'm not going to focus too much on this. I'm going to focus on the parts that come next. Because what I always find for what makes a good governance plan is the ability to drive some level of consistency across my teams. And that applies to naming conventions, it applies to structures, those things that we as users find reassuring. Because if I can go into a team, specifically if I look at a project team as an example, and I have all my projects are structured vaguely the same, then that gives me that little warm fuzzy feeling inside that, one, I know where to go and store my information. I know where to go and find information. If I look at naming conventions, that's going to help me find my teams much more effectively, particularly if I've got a long list, than if they are just names, random things based on whatever was whoever created it decided to call it. So we'll look at how we can promote that consistency. But then we're starting to think about the users. We're providing them a platform which is starting to feel familiar to them, but we need to be able to give them that guidance. We need to be able to communicate with them. So all of the three things that we've got so far, if they are communicated and we provide the guidance for the users, generally we will find that they will come on that journey with us. They will understand how they should be using the platform. Now, without the guidance and communication, the other three quite often get misconstrued as this is IT beating us with a governance stick. Actually, no. What the governance is trying to do is outline the rules that we should be working in. Now, governance is nothing new. Every single day we live within the rules of the law, and those laws allow us freedoms to go about our day-to-day lives and do what we need to do. So a governance plan in IT shouldn't be any different than that. It should be, these are the guidelines. You have your freedoms within those guidelines to be able to do your job. And if we can communicate those guides and communicate on that, then you know what? We're going to get people bought into this. Because at the end of the day, who is the most important person who's in Microsoft Teams or in your solution? It's the user. So we need to bring the users along on this journey, and that's where the user adoption sits. And this is the reason why I sit right at the very I put this right at the very top. Jason's just said I'm the most important. Yeah, absolutely. You are the user. You are the most important person. So everything that I am doing throughout my governance plan is to support the users right at the very top of the pyramid, because without that protection, without the classification and protecting my data, then my users are going to lose confidence in it. Without consistency, my users are going to get confused. Without guidance and communication, my users are going to think they're just being told what to do. They're not actually being given the direction. So all of this is really driven towards that adoption piece, which sits right at the very top. So let's talk a little bit more about the adoption aspect. So within Microsoft Teams adoption, again, quick question to the room. How many of you have rolled out Teams and provided guidance on how to use the application, or training, or just some basic information about what it can do? Okay, good. So we got a few yeses coming in. Plus the Champions Network, Jason showing off. Okay, brilliant. So adoption is one of those things that, particularly again with a rapid rollout of Microsoft Teams, has really been neglected. Yeah, even if you just go through some of the Microsoft videos and provide those to your users, that's better than nothing. So I'm part of an organization that's about 180,000 people strong in terms of the number of users. And that organization has rolled out Microsoft 365, but provided very, very little training or guidance around how to use these tools. So generally what has happened for the people who have had Teams thrown at them, well, a lot of them are still using Skype because they know how to use it. They know what it does and how it works. They've even had SharePoint Online thrown at them. And rather than going through some adoption work and showing them the benefits of using SharePoint Online and lists as an example, what are they doing? Well, they're all still using Excel spreadsheets for everything. So without adoption, you can throw a piece of technology out there and it will sit there, it will stagnate, and it could possibly eventually die. So what do we need to do to try and bring on those adoption pieces? Well, when I'm looking at putting this into the context of Microsoft Teams, as in this session, what I'm trying to do is drive adoption by making things easy. I wouldn't say we're lazy, but we like an easy life. We'll always try and take the path of least resistance. So if the path of least resistance for me is, rather than going to IT and saying, can I have a team, please? Going back to just using emails or attachments or whatever it might be, then actually that's counterintuitive. So if I can make it easy, then I can bring people on that journey much more effectively than if I put obstacles in their way. But everything to do with Microsoft 365 is about empowerment. It's about what's the Microsoft term? Democratization. I have to practice actually saying that. It's about being able to pass on the ability for users to find their way within the platform. So Teams is no exception to that. Teams is designed for the end users to go and create their teams, create the structures that work for them, and be able to then communicate and work in the way that is most effective for them. So when we try and build our governance and we look at how is our governance going to affect our adoption in terms of empowerment, are we taking it away, or are we giving them too much, or are we finding that balance? Just like when we were building up the pyramid, I said we were trying to make the users feel safe in the environment. If the users don't trust it, if they're putting things in there and all of a sudden they've got people who are seeing things that they shouldn't, then they're not going to use it. We again, in a previous employer, we had a situation where someone had put a load of files into SharePoint Online. They were all disciplinary records, hadn't secured anything, and suddenly a lot of that information was exposed. Now, for that area of the business, they suddenly lost trust in the solution because they hadn't been given that adoption training, they hadn't been given the guidance on how to use it, and so they didn't feel safe using the platform. Those of us in the Microsoft 365 team thought that was funny, and we called them names and said, well, you should have spoken to us. But generally, there was a lot of there was a big question then about the safety. So if you can make the users feel safe, they will generally come along and work in the way that on the platform in the way that you want them to work. And above all, build the understanding. Don't just give the rules, explain why. So if we can explain why we want the users to work in a certain way, so we don't want you to drive over 30 miles an hour because if you drive over 30 miles an hour, it's going to increase the risk of knocking somebody over. Yeah, you understand why you should be adhering to the speed limit. Exactly the same applies for our IT governance. Build the understanding, explain why, bring the users on that journey, and generally you will see an upsurge in adoption. Yeah, perfect wording there from Neil in the chat. Guide, support, and mentor. Three key phrases, and just keep that going constantly. So that's the gospel for governance according to Matt Weston. So what am I going to do about it? Come on, Matt, let's start talking about some Power Automate. So let's look at how we can support parts of that governance plan with Power Automate. And I'm going to focus on the top 3 aspects. I'm going to focus on the consistency, the communication and guidance, and then the user adoption. So what we've got within within Power Automate now is we have the Microsoft Teams connector. Now this is massively maturing. There's new stuff rolling out to this really quickly at the moment, which is absolutely fantastic to see. So what I'm going to do is focus on how we can use this connector, how we can use the actions in this connector to go and provision our teams in a controlled manner, and then how we can start to build on some of those things that I've been talking about. Now, the key thing that I'm going to point out as we go through all of this is that everything I'm going to show you is achievable in standard licensing. You don't need anything premium unless you want to go beyond and do some additional stuff. But it's all designed to be done just in the seeded licenses that you get with M365 and D365. So what have I got around the triggers first of all? So within the connector, we have 2 triggers. We've got, two of the automatic triggers, I should say. I've got when a new team member is added and when a new team member is removed, when a team member is removed. So if I have specific teams that I want to maybe build more control over, if I want to make sure that there's a specific user in there, then if I get a trigger to say that person's been removed, then I can automatically add them back in. So that is done on a per team basis. So that's not something that I'm going to do for everything, but it might be something that if I want to use that trigger, that I do it on an ad hoc basis. But where I see a lot more power is in the actions. And these are 3 actions that I really want to focus on. Create a team, create a channel, add a member. Because these are the things that are going to build up the blocks for anything that I'm going to build in Power Automate through my demos. So create a team, exactly as it says on the tin, is going to create a team. Creating a channel is going to allow us to provision channels in there. And adding members to the team means that I can then automatically apply memberships, members or owners to my teams. So think about all of these 3 things when I go back to my pyramid and say consistency, user guidance, and the user adoption. Yeah, so these 3 things are absolutely key to those parts. So I'm going to apply them to a number of scenarios. The scenarios that I'm going to apply them to throughout my demo is going to be, first of all, the team's creation process. So we're going to look at a way of replacing the out-of-the-box mechanism by creating our own provisioning process using Power Automate. But then not just creating the team, how we can supply additional support to the users who are creating the teams. And then finally, there's always that little bit in the background that seems to be forgotten, which is the little thing called Sharepoint. So how are we going to also bring in some of our governance aspects to the Sharepoint sites behind the scenes so that we've also got elements of consistency and control over those? So the first part, creating teams. So obviously, one of the things that I want to do is I want to take a request from a user to say, I want a team. And I'm going to do that in a couple of ways, and I'll demonstrate those. We're going to go and create the team. And I'm going to, once I've created it, I'm going to go, right, there you go, user, there is your team. Nice and simple to start off with. But so far that's given us the controlled approach to creating our teams. But then, how about building a little bit of consistency in? Actually, that was built into the last one. So I've missed one block off on there. I'm going to add some channels to that as well. But then I'm going to provide some support. So we're going to create the team. And I'm now going to supply the user or the person who's requested it with some key information about how to use that team. Because it might be that actually for a specific type of team, we have different terms, different usage guidelines. So actually, if I can recognize what type of team they're building, then I can go ahead and give them some guidance. And then I'm going to take a leaf out of the Centre of Excellence book for the Power Platform, and I'm going to promote a little bit of a community around my teams as well. And then finally, we're going to create the team, and then we're going to do something with the actual SharePoint site behind the scenes, because actually I will end up going into SharePoint at some point, whether it's because I want to use more of the document management functionality. Maybe it's because I've got some lists in there that I want to go and create. So why not actually, if I'm going to the extent of providing consistency across my teams, well, why not do it across the SharePoint site as well? Why not make that look and feel like other areas of my SharePoint sites? So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to create a project site. I'm going to have a project hub, so a hub site. And so when my team is created, I'm going to automatically assign the SharePoint site that's created with the team to that hub site, so that everything then has that consistent look and feel across the board. Right, enough talking. Let's see something. If my mouse wakes up, let's come and grab my demo environment. So what are the key things that I've got in here? So I've currently got Microsoft Teams. So that is showing no Teams here at the moment. So we'll see that populate in a moment. I've got a SharePoint site at the moment that is going to, which is going to be where I create my initial request. And all I'm doing for that is using a very, very simple Power App, which I've just put on there with some really interesting colors. And we're going to raise our request. What I've also got, if I actually just come back to SharePoint for a moment, is I've got I must have closed it, which is my project hub somewhere, collaboration hub. Okay, so I've got my collaboration hub, which is where all of my project management stuff is going to take place. And as you can see, it's of a dark theme. So the reason why I've given it a nice dark theme is just so that we can immediately see the difference when I actually go to my SharePoint sites later. And then, as you would expect, I have a flow which has been created behind the scenes, which we'll go and explore in a moment. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, as a user, I'm going to come and raise a request in my SharePoint environment. And my SharePoint request list actually includes the dropdown for a template. So supporting this, I actually have another SharePoint list called templates. And in here, I have some really key information. I've obviously got the name of the template, but I've also got some usage information, some terms, and I've even got a comma delimited list of the channels that I want created. So I'm going to create project management, and I'm going to create delivery. So the reason for doing this is so that I can have a list which people can go and select from, and it will then allow them to go and select just the templates and just the types of team that I want them to create. So let's come back to my home. So like I said, I've got the ability to create a new team here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to call this my Power Platform UG team. So I want this team because I want a team. And I'm going to select a template. So I've only got one in there at the moment, so I'm going to select my project. And I'm going, at that point, I'm going to go ahead and submit that. So I've now submitted my request into here. But obviously, but I can obviously select, or I can obviously get information into here in a number of different ways. So what I could also be doing at this point is I could have a Power Virtual Agent, which I've got set up. Oops, wrong one. Which I thought I got published, but I haven't. Let's come and find my bot. So I could actually be creating a Power Virtual Agent that will take some inputs from my users and actually feed that into that same list. Oh, there we go. You can see it's running. So I've just got a request come through. So if I was to look at my chatbots, for an example, I could be creating a bot in here that is going to take some information. It's going to request some information from a user, and it's going to also pass that into my SharePoint list. So the reason for showing both of these is just really to really highlight that your users could be asking for teams in multiple different ways. So we need to think about how we structure our flows and our creation process to make sure that we can capture both of them. So regardless of whether I'm using a Power App or whether I use a bot, both of them will actually fill my request list. Why am I? So then when it actually comes to my flow, my actual creation flow runs off a trigger that's based on the SharePoint list. I could have done it directly from my bot. I could have done it directly from Power Apps, but then I'm really maybe either working with two copies of that same flow. It could be that I'm not then sort of rejecting another way of being able to raise the requests, for example, via an email. So at least if I do it this way, I can have smaller flows feeding into my list, and then my big flow, which is the creation process, I only have to manage in one place. So let's go and have a look at what's actually happening. So the first thing is that obviously I'm going to trigger when an item is created in my request list. From there, I'm going to, just so that I've got control, and so me as someone in IT has still got the kill switch on this, I'm going to submit it for an approval. So I'm going to just send them some basic information. So what is the team? What's the template? What's the justification for it? Who has it been requested by? So that's what we actually saw pop up into Teams Just. So I'm just going to go ahead and approve that request. Cool, and that will go on. And we'll see everything, all of this as it's running in a moment. So then, assuming that my approval has gone successfully, then I'll come to the support the creator in a moment. Then I'm going to drop into my team creation. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get the item template. And all I'm doing is based on the ID, because I'm using a lookup field in SharePoint, I'm going to go and grab the template information from the templates list. So now I know what channels need to be created. I know the guidance that needs to go with it, and I know the terms for using that particular team. So as I come down, the first thing I'm going to do is create the team. But actually, because I'm creating the team in a flexible way, in this way, it means that I can actually now start to implement my own naming convention. Now, again, quick into the chat. Is anybody using the out-of-the-box naming conventions for Microsoft 365 groups and therefore teams? No, because they didn't work. Was it so? Yeah, maybe you found the same thing as me, because they're very Americanized, very restrictive in terms of what we can actually create for our naming conventions. Okay, so if I was to use one of the out-of-the-box naming conventions, it will basically allow me to take a static string or an Active Directory attribute and combine those to create my team name. Now, that is okay, but if you want more information going into your naming convention, such as here I'm using the template name, so it will be prefixed with project as an example. It might be that if I'm also grabbing the client, for example, from my request, then I can include the client name in there. So it means that if I've created my naming convention in this way, it's very, very flexible. I can name the teams in a consistent way, but still in the way that I want them to be used. So that is going to give me that element of consistency. So that's a part of level 3 in my pyramid. From there, I'm going to grab my my channels from my list, and all I'm going to do is split the list based on the comma. And for each channel that I actually bring back, I'm going to go into my team and I'm going to create the channel for it. So I can take the new ID because the dynamic content that I have back from my creator team will give me the ID. So that ID means that I can now identify my new team. I know what my channels are because I'm getting them from my templates list, and I can go ahead and then start to create all of my channels. So now, from that again, tick another box for the consistency. It means that all of my projects are going to have a consistent start point. They're going to be named in a consistent manner. They are going to have the same channels in there by default. But again, this is much more flexible than the out-of-the-box templates, because potentially I can really start maybe to have a lot more conditions on what channels are being created. So far so good. I've got my team created. And all I'm going to do at that point is I'm going to mark it as a tick, well done, in the actual request list. But you know what? I'm going to let the users know that their team is now ready, because particularly if I've got an approval process in place, I don't expect my user to go create and then just sit there waiting for the team to be created. I want to say your team is now ready for you, and I can do that in a number of ways. So I can send them an email. So I can put some information in here. I can say, thank you very much, your team is now being created. But actually, what other really useful information did I have in my templates list? Well, I had some usage information and I had some terms. So why not start hitting the user with the information about how they should be correctly using that particular type of team? So if it's a project, you will not use this team. You will not share content externally. You will use it for this specific type of content. Yeah, it means that you can really define the rules for how your users are using it. But if you like me, I don't pick my emails up usually until an evening because I spend most of my day living in Teams. So if I expand out my the next one, well, actually, if my users are in Teams, they're requesting their team from in Teams. Why should I expect them to go elsewhere to get notified that it's now ready? So you know what, let's hit them with a message in Teams, and let's send them the same information. Let's go, right, there you go. There's your team. There's your how you use it. That's how, those are the terms for using it. Yeah. So again, I'm hitting my users with how I want them to use it. Guidance and communication. I'm providing them the rules and the guidance on how they should be using the platform in a safe and consistent manner. So far, so good. So we've done consistency, and we've also got the next one up. So we've got 2 out of those 3 parts now covered off. But I'm just going to scroll back up for a moment, because one of the things that I also said was actually I'm going to support the creator. So if you're familiar with the Centre of Excellence from the Power Platform, what they tend to promote is a Yammer community for anybody who is recorded as creating a Power App or an automation. Well, why can't we do exactly the same for Teams or for SharePoint, where we can bring together people who are creating these elements to share good practice to help each other out, just like we mentioned, like Jason mentioned earlier on, we can build that champions network without actually doing anything from IT ourselves. So we're automatically fostering that internal help and that internal community. So I can get some information from Yammer, and you know what? I'm going to add that into my messages and into my emails as well. So I'm not just saying here's a link to Yammer, go and check it out. I can also take some of the latest posts from there and say these are the sorts of things that are being asked. If you've got a similar sort of question, go there and ask as well. So user adoption, bringing the users on board, helping to feel them to feel supported, to give them the guidance and the additional training they need to be able to use the tool properly. Cool. So far we've created a team. I've sent a notification to the user. But so far, the only user I'm actually talking to is the person who requested it, so my owner. But actually, there could be many more people who actually use that particular team. So I also want to hit them with the key information about how to use it. So I know what team I've just created because I've got the ID. So you know what? Let's go one step further. Let's actually take that useful terms, that useful information, and let's put it in the team so that everybody else can also use it and make the most of that guidance. So again, using more of the Microsoft the Teams connector actions, I can get. I've decided I'm going to mention the owner just so that that person's aware that they've got the information. But I can then go and get my my channels that I've created from the list of channels. So I know my team ID because remember I created that earlier on, and that's my dynamic content. Now, because when I post a message, I have to provide the ID for a channel. I do need to parse the array of channels that comes back. So if I can filter it, I can look for where my channel is equal to general. I can do a little bit of work on it. I can parse the JSON, and then I can pass that in as the actual ID of the channel itself. So now I'm dealing with two absolutely beautiful looking GUIDs, one for the team, one for the channel. So I know that my message is going to the right place. And then exactly like what I did with my emails earlier on, I'm going to hammer that into the team so that as soon as my users start using it, it's in their face. No one has got any excuses for not seeing the fact that I've got some usage information and some terms in there. So far so good. We've just handled the first two scenarios that I described. And if I go and actually have a look at my teams, so what's happened? So I've got my chat message. And as you can see, I've got a message in here going, hi, here's your team. Here's how to use it. And here are the terms for using this particular team. So any teams that are created for the purpose of running a project within CompuGlobal Hyper Meganet, as you can tell, I'm a huge Simpsons fan, then it's going to go ahead and just give them the information. So nothing should be shared outside the team unless permission is granted by the head of PMO. If I go and look at my teams themselves, I've got my Power Platform UG created. It's created my general, my delivery, my project management, and it's pushed my message into my team here ready for me. So what I could do is I could then go and actually it's already pinned, pin that to the top. So then automatically everybody is going to go ahead and look at my message. Looking good so far. But what was the final scenario I wanted to look at? Well, generally, when we have a team behind the scenes, it's a absolutely bog standard SharePoint team site. It has no bearing or no consistency with anything else that sits within my SharePoint tenancy. But but as I said earlier on, at some point we are likely to go into SharePoint. So why should I be going to the lengths of providing that level of consistency for my team if that consistency is going to be lost once we get into the backend service? So let's do something then. I showed you earlier on that I have my collaboration hub. Now the rules within my governance plan say that every project site created in SharePoint should also be part of my project management hub or my collaboration hub. So I can do that manually. Yes, I can go to my site settings. I can say associate with this hub. You know what? That's work. Like I mentioned earlier on, I could be considered lazy or considered efficient, whichever way you want to look at me. So let's go and actually see how we can do that with Power Automate instead. So I've created my team. And now let's go and handle the SharePoint site behind the scenes. So what effectively I'm going to do here is I'm going to delay slightly because it takes a couple of extra seconds for my SharePoint site to go and provision. So I always put a 10-second delay in just to give to my SharePoint that little bit of time. But then I'm going to do some additional things. I'm going to find the URL for the site that I've just created. I'm going to find the hub ID for my hub site, and I'm going to join the two together. Now, everything that we have done so far, nothing will actually show me the actual URL. And I'll just prove that before I go into that. So if I go and look at my run that's just gone through, I've created my team. So if I go into my condition in my team, it's given me an ID, no URL. So how do I know what my SharePoint URL is? Well, actually, little bit of a hidden knowledge on the SharePoint admin site. The SharePoint Administration Center is a SharePoint site, so treat it exactly as that. So that means if I come to my SharePoint site, I can actually put my site address in as my admin center. On the admin center, there is a hidden list, and it's called Do Not Delete SP List Tenant Admin Aggregated Site Collections. I would never have guessed that in a million years, but luckily a little bit of PowerShell did uncover that for me, and there are a number of hidden lists on there. But what this list contains is a complete list of all of the sites that have been created in my SharePoint tenancy. And if I use get items against that list, that means that I can now go ahead and query for a specific piece of metadata. So if I go and just show you what actually comes back from that. So I've got this lovely wodge of JSON that comes back here. So if I go and put this into code just so we can format it, then this is, I'm just pulling back one here. But what I actually get is I get a site URL. Boom, that's the information I'm looking for. I need that. But how do I pick the site that I actually want? Well, if it's a group, if we think about it, the team that gets created is already automatically associated with a group, and so therefore has a group ID. So I can take my group ID. Where's this group ID come from? Well, actually, it's come from here. So I can take my my new team ID, which is the equivalent of my group ID. I can then go and query that list and look for any site that has that group ID. So if I now come into my get items and just open up my advanced, it means I can now do a filter query on that group ID and say just get the item where the group ID is equal to my new team ID. So that means that rather than having potentially hundreds or thousands of things coming back, I'm going to have just one. I can then pass that JSON, so I can make it into some dynamic content. So now I've immediately got my URL. So I can now use that later on. But the last thing that I need to do before I finish this is I need to find out what my hub site ID is. So when I actually use the join hub site action, that would be so much easier if that actually just said, what is the URL you wanted to join to? If only life was that simple. So I'm going to use one web request, and it's I'm going to use the send a HTTP request to SharePoint, and I'm going to get back a hub site ID. And that hub site ID is going to bring back the ID that I need to pass into this final step. Now, again, send a HTTP request to SharePoint is a standard connector. This is much more simple than the way we used to do it. We used to have to use the HTTP, which is unfortunately now premium. We would have to call out to Azure AD, get a bearer token, and then go and then perform our web requests. It got really confusing really quickly. Whereas this will recognize who I am based on my connection. It will then go and get all that information for me. And what that gives me back is, let's keep scrolling down. It gives me the hub site ID. So that's effectively everything that I now need. I've got my ID, my hub site ID. I've got my URL that came from my central list. So we're looking good. I've now got everything that I need. I can go ahead and join my hub site. I can go ahead and join my SharePoint site to the hub site. So now I get my consistent global nav. I get my consistent branding. Good story. Has it worked? So if I come back to Teams again, let's go and get my team wired up. So if I open in SharePoint, then I will see that I've got my bog standard team site, but it's automatically joined to my hub, and it has now brought it all together into a nice consistent user experience, so that even if I'm using it from the SharePoint perspective, I've still got that consistency, which is making my users feel nice and safe in terms of the way that they are using the platform. Cool. There we go. So that is the full run through of that demo. If you want to take it further, then you can really start to explore some of the additional functionality that you might want to start thinking about. So as an example, you could start to explore the graph and look at how you can use some of those graph endpoints to maybe go and add additional tabs. And that's one of the things that I'm exploring more at the moment. You could utilize Azure Automation. And if you really want to learn about Azure Automation, speak to Ben, who's going to be speaking later. He's normally my go-to guy for Azure Automation and how that PowerShell can be hosted in the cloud and then used to, again, further enhance what we're doing. But really use your imagination around, what do I want to achieve from this process? What do I actually want to govern? And how am I going to use a technical solution such as Power Automate to be able to support everything that we've just been talking about? So just very quickly then, just to summarize. So what we've spoken there about governance, about how we can build that up, but then how we can use Power Automate as a technical solution to support it, using a governed process for creating the teams with or without approval processes, being able to create things in a common way, to say that we've got the same channels, naming conventions, to have that consistency for the users. But not just the provisioning element itself, having those adoption and those guidance pieces in place as well automatically, so that every user who creates or uses a team understands what they should be doing, how they should be using the team, and how they should be using that particular usage of teams to the best effect for them and for the rest of the organization. So I'll pause there for breath. And we've got any questions? Yep. So we've got one in the chat. So, are the connected hub sites automatically added to the navigation, or is there another way they can be viewed from the hub site? So I personally have used Azure Automation for this in the past to actually go ahead and run some PowerShell to update that navigation. I'm going to put Ben on the spot. I can see it. Oh, I can just see the startled look there. Have you done much in terms of adding things programmatically into hub site navigations, Ben, or have you not looked at that at all?
I have not looked at doing that programmatically. All I know is there's nothing that is out of the box. Like you said, it would be some Azure automation, maybe something with the graph or with the endpoints for REST endpoints for SharePoint. It's not just let's associate it and have it automatically added that I have ever come across.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only alternative that I've used in the past is using things such as the highlighted content and configuring that just to show sites, or even using the PnP search web part again to configure that just to use just to bring back results that are sites. And then using that as an in-page navigation rather than using the global header. So there's a couple of ways that you can work around it. Nothing quite really that nice to actually go and update that hub navigation.
Yeah. Someone should go put a user voice request in to have that as an option when you associate a site with a hub site.
Yeah, what would be really nice is we can actually configure navigation based on a search term, so that it builds automatically and then security trims. So yeah, hopefully.
I have a third-party product that does that, or I know of one. I don't have one personally. I know of one that has a really nice navigation bar that you can build a lot of that stuff out in, if you don't mind paying for one.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. We've got a partner who do Internet in a Box, and that's one of the things they really promoted, that navigation. But yeah, some interesting ways that you can work around it as well. Cool. Are there any other questions just before we pause for a break? Okay, fantastic. I will be on chat, or I'll be around for a chat as we go through the break anyway. So let me get rid of that and let's go back to my other presentation. So we'll have a 10-minute break. So feel free to grab a coffee, grab a beer, whatever you fancy drinking. I know it's not beer o'clock for you yet, Ben. So you'll just have to watch us drinking.
It's still the middle of the day for me, and I have to present.
But we'll start again at 8 o'clock, and I'll hand over to Ben to wow us with the second session. How you getting on with your demos, Ben? Are they all working? There we go. Welcome to the guys who joined halfway through that as well. So really good to see you here. Thank you for joining. So I'm going to stop recording for a moment just so